north wall, shared breath they bridged. They breathed. They struck as the giant spirit raised both claws for the kill. The world sang. It was not a beautiful song. It was iron dragged along stone and rain crushed through leaves and bone learning how to be drum. The sound rose through their forearms and into their ribs and out along their palms, and the air obeyed. The great claw that should have fallen like a temple roof met their cut and slowed as if it had been forced to move through a river. The claw did not stop. It scraped forward, gouging a line across the ward light that showered them with bright sparks. Zhao's wrists screamed through the bandage. Liang felt the thread in his chest pull and he gave it breath instead of fear. Shenlan and Mu Qiu were there, a clear note sliding sideways into their tone. Hanya and Qiandu crashed their strike like waves that did not care if rock or shore stood ahead. The giant spirit lurched. The mask on its face split and reknit and split again, like ice trying to remember water. Anchor, Elder Jian called. The word reached them without force and the ground beneath their feet understood it. Pairs moved by reflex. Twin branches fell in a circle that did not need to be drawn. Palms cut, 10 and then 12 and then 14 pairs, each tone a line of sound binding the spirit's vast shoulders and its gathering claws. The thing bent and flowed and tried to become smoke to slip through their work, but each time it thinned, a hand struck its shadow and gave the smoke edges again. Liang's breath began to taste like iron. He could not feel his knuckles through the ache. The ember in his dantian beat as if it wanted to be hard. Zhao's eyes were fever bright. Their first cut had come together without thought. The second had cost them balance. The third asked for something that practice had not yet named. The giant spirit shoved forward. The ward line behind it snapped like a stretched cord and the gap opened a finger wider. New shapes pressed at the edges. Faces appeared and vanished. Limbs formed and melted. The air smelled of whetstone and lightning and burned resin. A cluster of younger disciples on the parapet flinched, their hands slipping on the supporting sigils. Elder Jian raised his staff toward them without looking and their spines found straight again as if the staff had grabbed a thread through distance. Do not chase the claw, Instructor Cai called, his voice steadier than the world deserved. Cut the breath that lifts it. Liang heard the words and did not understand them until he saw the way the giant spirit moved. It was not muscle. It was not bone. Breath lifted the claw and breath drew it down, the same way their palms rose and fell. He felt for the moment just before the rise, the small hollow in the sound where the breath would choose to be. He looked at Zhao and saw understanding arrive in the other boy's eyes, angry and clean. In, Liang said. Now. They took the inhale not with the spirit, but against it. They stepped when it gathered itself, and their palms fell into the hollow before the claw could find weight. Their tone did not strike the limb. It struck the breath that made the limb possible. The great arm jolted. The mask flickered, its features breaking apart and spinning like dead leaves in sudden wind. Shen Yian's pair caught the opening and their cut took the shoulder. Hanya and Qiandu hooped and poured everything they had into a strike that would break a stall post. The thing reeled back. For a heartbeat the breach did not grow. Cai walked the line behind them with his staff held high. He did not conduct. He did not dare. He paced like a man ready to give you balance if you would only remember that you owned some. Another spirit pushed its head through the broken sigils to the right of the Great One. It was smaller, but thick in the body and dense in its smoke, as if it had been wound too tight. It took the shape of a bull and then of a man and then of a tree and then of a bull again. Mu Qiu staggered. Her lips were blue at the edges. Shenlan put her shoulder against Mu Qiu's and their two breaths touched and steadied, and together they struck the smaller shape with a note so thin and true the bull fell to its knees and the tree shivered its leaves in a wind that did not exist. Cores, someone shouted from the parapet. Take the cores when they fall. A shard from the first spirit Liang and Zhao had broken still lay in the dust at their feet. It looked like stone soaked long in ink and then left under a winter moon. It pulsed at the edges of sight like a heartbeat you were not sure belonged to you. Zhao bent to grab it and nearly lost his stance. Liang stepped into the place where Zhao's balance had been and carried the bridge for one breath until Zhao stood again. They did not speak. Zhao set his jaw, scooped the shard with his left hand, and tucked it against his side with his elbow while he lifted his right and found the bridge again. Elder Jian must have seen that motion. He did not scold. He shifted with a half step and the sigil nearest the gap brightened as if he had fed it a mouthful of pure day. Another inner disciple to their left took his cue and pressed a core against the carved stone. The light took it like a hungry child takes warm bread. The ward line steadied for a breath. Use the stones, Elder Jian said. Use their bones to close what their mouths have opened. The command gave shape to motion. The pairs that could spare a hand scooped shards and fed them to the wards. The pairs that could not spare any attention struck hard enough to make more shards. The field filled with the clatter of cores and the bright hiss of sigils drinking them. It was not victory. It was a way to talk the wall into standing up while your hands were still empty. The giant spirit saw the feat and raged. It drove both claws at once into the gap where the sigils were dimmest. The world leaned sideways to accommodate the force. Everything that had weight shifted with it. Liang's heel slid. Zhao's bridge trembled. The younger pairs cried out and their tones broke into breath that did not know where to go. The choice came then and it came with threads. Liang felt the spiral in his chest wake as if a hand had touched it. Threads sprang outward from the giant spirit's claws, from the pairs around him, from the breath of the ward itself. He saw moments that had not yet happened and several that had, layered like thin paper and water. In one thread he clung to Zhao and they dug in and held their small square while other squares fell. In one he leapt forward and struck alone and the song shattered and the claw found his face. In one he threw the core he carried at the sigil without timing and the light spit it out and the wall took offense and remembered nothing of their effort. There was a thread he had never seen before. In it he lifted his hand not to strike, but to count for others. Not a command. An offering. A place where two breaths could meet. On my voice, Liang said. The words did not leave his throat as a shout. They went out flat and low and carried anyway, as if the platform had decided they mattered and explained that to the air. Pairs on the left, in on 1. Pairs on the right, in on 2. Center on 3. Cut together on 4. Zhao's glance was a blade and when it touched Liang it became something that cut rope instead of flesh. Count it, he said, and there was no mockery in it. Cai did not argue. He flicked his staff toward Liang as if to say go on, and the elder on the parapet made no sound at all, which for him was consent carved into stone. 1, Liang said. The left pairs drew a breath that tasted of frost and smoke. 2. The right pairs filled their chests. The sound was a cup being filled, not a mouth trying to own a room. 3. Zhao and Liang and the three pairs nearest them found the same small hollow inside their lungs and let it widen until it could hold a voice. 4. The court sang. It did not sing as one, not smooth, not clean, not yet. It sang as a rope is made, many fibers braided until it can hold a weight that none could lift alone. The notes struck not from the arms but from that shared count. The giant claw descended into a net of sound and the net did not break. The strike did not push it back. It changed the shape of its fall. The claws landed a hand's width to the left of where they meant to. The gouge they left hit stone, not sigil. The ward light lived. Zhao laughed, startled and wild. Again, he said. Liang lifted his hand and the pairs watched it as if it had become a bell. The second count came quicker. The third slower. The fourth graduated from numbers to simple breath, and the pairs obeyed that too, because sometimes all a person needs is to be told where to put their lungs. The giant spirit learned. It tried to break the rhythm. It tried to strike on offbeats. It tried to fake a rise and then fall on nothing. Each trick cost them blood and balance, and sometimes it cost them more. A boy near the right edge of the breach misread the feint and stepped into a half strike, and the smoke reached him. It tore across his ribs and left his breath puddled at his feet. Mu Chiu was there before he hit the ground. Her palm found his chest and pushed a single hard breath into him, and then Shen Lan cut down and the smoke backed up and did not taste boy, it tasted cut, and the boy gasped and cried like a man who has just learned that breath can be taken and given by other hands. The cores kept coming. They fell when spirits broke, and they came from the parapet where inner disciples emptied the stores set aside for bad days and then decided this was worse than those. Zhao's injured wrist gave way twice and Liang took the bridge with both arms and Zhao struck with the last of his reach, and then in the next count they switched tasks without speaking and their shoulders accepted the trade as if they had been born to it. The giant spirit refused to fade. If you want us to keep making more stories like this, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Azure Inkblade. Now, back to the chapter. Its body pulsed with smoke from beyond the wall, fed by distance and by anger. The mask broke and reformed until it no longer looked like any face. It was an absence where a face might be. Elder Jian watched that absence with a stillness that seemed to frighten the air. Then he stepped forward into the gap between counts and struck his staff once against the ground. Light flared along the carved head. Sigils etched into old wood answered those carved in stone, and for a breath the wards remembered how they had felt on the day they were set. Seal, Elder Jian said. It was not an order. It was an invitation to recall. Every pair that could still lift their arms lifted them. Every chest still willing to hurt did so. Liang counted a last time without numbers. He raised his hand. He lowered it. He brought the cut down as if he were setting a lid on a pot to keep the last warmth from leaking out. The sound that rose from the court then had a shape. It had always had volume. It had always had weight. Now it had shape. The shape was a door closing with care. The shape was a seam pulled shut with thread and patience. The shape was hands meeting over a wound. The giant spirit threw its mass against that shape, and the shape did not allow entry. The mask tore itself in the effort to find a mouth. The claw bent as if it remembered joint and then remembered it had none and screamed for it as if it were owed. The wards drank light and drank cores and drank the last drops of boldness from lungs that could spare them, and then the breach narrowed to the width of a finger and then to a hair and then to a memory. The field went quiet in a way that hurt the ear. Dust settled. Cores that had not yet found stone stopped feeling like hearts and became rocks again. The smell of resin lifted and left the taste of water behind. The great shape beyond the wall did not vanish. It stretched itself thin and sulked. It whispered a sound that suggested it would return when the day turned its face. The wall did not answer. It did not need to. People came back to their bodies. They found the places their hands had been. They discovered balance like a lost child asleep on their shoulder. The boy Mu Chiu had saved sat up with a sob and then laughed without meaning to. Zhao leaned his forehead against his wrist and shook without noise. Shen Lan tied a knot in Mu Chiu's sleeve with fingers that had decided to remember how. Han Ye clapped Jian Du on the back and then hugged him because the clap had not been enough. Liang looked down and realized his knees were locked and had been for far too long. He let them bend with care. His hands were open but his fingers were stuck in the shape of the cut. He closed them and opened them until they were hands again. The ember in his dantian had come through the fire, not smaller, but warned. It pulsed with a message he could not read, only live. Elder Jian stood with his staff grounded and let the silence last for the length of 100 breaths. He did not rush to speak. When he finally did, he used the tone he reserved for naming true things. You answered, he said. The wall remembers. That was all. It was enough. It was the kind of praise that puts a stone in a person's pocket that they will touch with their fingers years later on another road and know where the first road turned. Cai made the rest of the words practical. Those who can walk, gather the shards that remain. They will not be wasted. Those who can breathe without coughing blood, you will help those who cannot. The stewards will bring water. The apothecaries will take the wounded. If your hands are shaking, use them. Shaking hands can carry as well as strike. He turned to Liang then and did a thing he rarely did. He met the boy's eyes and nodded once. The nod had the weight of a hand in it. It said, I saw. It said, do not make a habit of spending yourself like that, but when the hour asks it of you, answer again. Zhao straightened and looked at Liang as if measuring a piece of ground that had been leveled overnight. It was not friendship. It was not even truce. It was an adjustment to a map. He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. Do not count without warning next time, he said, but there was a grin under the blood and it was almost a joke. Then listen without being told, Liang said, and the grin he returned was not sharp. It was tired and clean. They bent to the work together. They gathered cores. They carried a boy whose foot had turned under him. They poured water. They poured quiet words. The sun moved across the face of the wall and the stone warmed. The words hummed a little to themselves, like an old song remembered while sweeping. The sparrow came only when the worst of the noise had faded. It landed on the top of an unbroken post and looked down at the court that had tried to be a choir. Its feathers caught the light in thin lines. It did not tilt its head at first. It looked at Liang as if this were not a surprise. Then it permitted itself a small shift, a tiny ruffle that could have been approval or amusement. The whisper came as soft as breath through felt. Every choice devours the rest. Liang wanted to answer aloud. He did not. He had no voice left to waste. He spoke to the whisper in the only language he had that was not throat. He stayed. He helped a boy tie a clumsy sling. He walked with Shenlan to the apothecaries and carried a basin she was too proud to admit she needed lifted. He fetched a cup for Muqiu and only let go when she took it. He sat on the stone when he could and stood when he must, and when he stood straight. The evening came down with a cool hand. The inner disciples on the parapet walked their lines like men who had learned something they had thought they already knew. Elder Jian remained as the light lost its edge. He faced the north and watched the place where the great shape sulked beyond memory. Cai gathered the last of the cores and stacked them like black fruit beside the stairs. The court emptied slowly. People do not like to leave a place that has just agreed to let them live. When it was nearly bare, Zhao leaned on the parapet and looked toward the woods as if he could will the trees to admit they had been impressed. You counted, he said without turning his head. They listened. They listened because the wall would not, Liang answered. Sometimes the ground needs a voice. Zhao snorted like a man who hears a proverb and does not want to confess that it is one. Do not begin to sound like the elders, he said. Then, after a beat that tried to hide and failed, you did well. Liang did not say thank you. He let the words sit. He felt their weight and decided they could stay. They walked back to the lower yard in a quiet that was not the same as the quiet before the cry. The steps had their old trick, but today the trick felt kind. The scent of rice floated from the hall, and someone had set out a pot of ginger broth that had clearly been made by a steward who believed in mercy as a spice. People nodded as they passed. One boy who had mocked Liang in the first week did not meet his eyes now because he was busy standing up straight. Another who had been silent since arrival touched Liang's sleeve at the elbow and said nothing and walked away fast, which is the only way some thanks can be given. In his quarters, Liang unwrapped the strip of cloth and set the silver fang beside the lamp. He set a core beside it. The core was cold and heavier than it looked. He did not know if it would be allowed to keep, but for a breath of time it could sit there as proof that the day had been true. The sparrow landed at the sill and watched them both as if reading a ledger. Liang sat cross-legged and let breath return to him in small cups. The ember in his center did not feel like an ember. It felt like the first small coal in a brazier that has been fed and finally learned that its work is to stay, not to shout. He slid his palms together and felt the ghost of the tone hum under the skin. He saw again the threads. Not many. He was not in the valley. He was in a room with a door and a bed and a lamp. But even here choice braided itself into the lintel. He could sleep without practice and gather strength. He could practice without sleep and spend it before he earned it. He could go find Zhao and make talk that would cost both of them. He could go to the library and ask the old man if there was a book on counting for people who never wanted to count. He could sit and let stillness do work that movement cannot. He chose to sit. He chose to breathe as if the court had been another body that needed his air for a little while longer. He chose to listen to the space inside his chest and the space inside the room and the space inside the wall and let them all agree on a small tone that did not need to be loud to be real. Outside, the mountain exhaled. The pines gave that sound they make when evening cools their needles. Somewhere on the parapet, Elder Ji unstamped his staff once to mark the day the ward had held. The echo took its time finding the lower yard. When it arrived, the silver-feathered sparrow folded its wings and closed its eyes as if a song had ended at the note it had hoped for. Liang lay down only when the lamp had burned to its last thumb of oil. He did not dream of leaves. He did not dream of spirals. He slept like a boy who had counted for others and had been counted as well, and when the gong in the morning called the court back to stone he woke with a tired body and a steadier breath and a choice already waiting. He would go. He would bow. He would set his stance. He would lift his forearm and meet Zhao's with light contact. He would inhale on 1 and exhale on 2, and when the count needed to be 3 and 4 he would know why. He would work while the wall remembered. He would listen until the space inside and between stopped being loud. He would be ready when the ground refused again to stand on its own and asked for voices to explain it to itself.